Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going through more spoilers for Jump to Lightspeed. This is part 6. So as usual, those are first impression. I haven't yet played with any of those cards you're going to see today, and so take everything I say with a grain of salt. So I rank all those cards with 4 different rating is not excited, not sure, good, or amazing. Moving on, we're going to start with the 3 cards that I have the privilege to preview. In my first that I've the privilege to show to the community. And if you want to know in details what I think about those cards, I encourage you to see my previous video that I made, where I go into very great details about what I think about those cards, and I even show you a deck list in which you can really play those cards at their best. Spoiler alert, those cards, all 3 of those cards are, in my opinion, amazing, especially Eject and Put Dameron combo. I think it's going to be a strong part of what's going to shape the meta on the upcoming expansion. And Black One is a great support card, so I think very, very highly of those cards on a competitive setting. Don't forget that anything I say in this video is to relate specifically to Premier at a competitive level. Then the first card is going to be Sabine's Masterpiece. So this card is interesting, is it one of the first cards in the game that get additional bonuses depending on the kind of colors of units that you control. Unfortunately, I don't think this card is very good, and I'll explain you why. First of all, it is 3-drop. 3-3 for 3 is not a great stat line nowadays, with there's a lot of 3-4 for 3. Or 3-2 shielded unit for 3 that will trade very positively against this card, and sometimes even before this card has the chance to attack. So being at the same time relatively weak stats and only having effect whenever it attacks is a weakness, because it means that it's unlikely to actually provide any significant value. The other great limitation of this card is the fact that you require other units to be in play for this to work. And even if you do have, like, with one unit of a different color that you have in play, the card is okay, but not great. To really make this card worth it, you need to have at least 2 different colors of cards into play to be able to get at least 2 benefits. And not all benefits are made equal. The yellow one is, in my opinion, one of the best. The green one is quite good. The blue one is more situational. The red one is also a little bit more situational. So it's, in my opinion, it is a card that I think is going to be too difficult to set up. Obviously, it is meant to be played in a sort of a Hera deck that can play a wide variety of different colors of cards as long as there are specters. This card is also a rebel and specter and fighter, and vehicle, so all 4 traits are very relevant. Unfortunately, I don't think that's enough to make her good. I think there's just too much setup required, and the payoff, whenever the setup is correct, is not quite enough to make this worth it. Next we got a card called Guerilla Soldier, and this card, just like every single indirect damage card that I've rated so far, I have a trouble rating indirect damage. Indirect damage is really a mechanic that I will need to play to get a feel on how powerful that is. Therefore, every card that has the word indirect damage on it, I will have a problem rating. This card looks quite good at the when play. It has weak stats for the cost, but the when playability is significant, as it allows you to either, in a lot of situations, will allows you to kill a unit. 3 damage is usually enough to kill any 2 drops in the game, or if you do 2 damage to the unit and then 1 damage to the base, then it's basically 2 damage to a unit, 1 damage to that unit, and then the unit comes to play ready, which I think is quite good value. So obviously this card seems very strong, specifically when it's played on turn 2. Played any later than that, I'm afraid that the card is going to fall off a lot. So I think this card is great when you play on turn 2, or even as a turn 1 play in hand yellow could also be very strong. So if you play this in the first 2 turns in the game, I think it's a very good card. Any later than this, I'm afraid the card is going to be too situational. So it's going to require testing to see if this card is worth including, but in my opinion, this card has potential. Moving on, we got Stay on Target, which is a new buff spell specifically for vehicles. We know that, of course, there's loads of vehicles units in this expansion. With that being said, and I said it before and I'll say it again, buff spells are by definition situational, so adding an additional condition to a buff spells is always a big problem. With that being said here, the condition, if you're playing a full vehicle deck, which is very possible to do, thanks to every vehicle that are being brought by Jump to Lightspeed, then maybe that limitation is not that big of a deal for you. With that being said, always keep in mind that your leader is not a vehicle, unless you're playing as a leader pilot. So that's definitely something you have to bear in mind. Also, the rating is not great. +2 attack for 2 resources is not great. Obviously, the comparison, we get surprise strike, you get +3 attack, and all that stuff. Here, the advantage is that you get to draw a card if you deal damage to the base. With that being said, understand that for buff spells, usually buff spells are used as finishers. Especially if you're using a buff spell on a unit to attack a base, you use this as a way to finish the game. So buff spells are basically used in 2 ways in this game. They're either used to allow you to have units trade above their to be able to units to trade and kill units that are bigger than them, as a combat trick basically, or use it as a finishing in order to finish the base, to give you the last bit of damage that you need to finish the base. That's basically the 2 major ways to use buffs. And here in this case, obviously you don't draw a card if you attack a unit with this, so then the rating becomes very bad, 2 resources for 2, so you're meant to attack the base when you're using that, and when you do, usually you don't want to use buff spells early on in the game, because they are not advancing your board state. You are using buff spells usually as a finishing blow, and if you are using this as a finishing blow, drawing a card hardly matters. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the rating of the card is not great, and the fact that it draws you a card is not super relevant in my opinion. With that being said, there's not a lot of great buff spells for red. I think there's precision fire, which is the one for troopers, which is quite good if you play only troopers, but once again, not so easy to get troopers. This is also tactics, that means you can get it from Guerilla, so that's relevant. In my opinion, if you are playing yellow, there's no reason to play this card. Breaking in and surprise strikes are much better cards. However, if you don't play yellow and you need buff spells and you're playing a full vehicle deck, this could be a consideration. Obviously, there is a competition with Heroic Sacrifice and how's it called? Forgot the name. Heroic Sacrifice and the trench warfare. So it's gonna be a consideration. It's an additional option. So for me, it's a maybe. I'm not sure it's gonna see play or not. It is definitely not unplayable, especially if you don't play yellow. But obviously, there's a lot of if on this card for this to work. Next, we have a very interesting new base. It is the Nabat village. So this Nabat village essentially changes the mulligan rule for you. Instead of having the standard mulligan, which is you redraw up to your hand size, you get a new mulligan rules, which is similar to the mulligan rules that we have in Magic the Gathering Commander, where you can place any numbers of cards at the bottom of your deck and then redraw a card. So yeah, you draw 2 extra cards and then you put them 3 backs at the bottom of your deck, which is, yeah. So this allows you to dig. It's actually better than Commander, now that I think about it, because not only are you allowed to put 3 of those cards back, but you get to see 3 more cards right at the gate. So it's slightly better actually than the Commander Mulligan in Magic. So this obviously is a quality. You're basically sacrificing damage on your base in order to get higher quality cards on your opening hand. Basically, that's basically what this means. Is this worth it? It's going to require testing. In my opinion, there are certain decks that really want this card. Obviously, the card that really want this card have cards that are very, very powerful openings and really want to see a specific cards on their opening hand. So one good example for this is if you're playing like let's say you're playing a Thrawn, like a Thrawn yellow deck with the when defeated effect, and you want to see, in my opinion, in the new Thrawn deck, like one of the strongest card in the deck is going to be Director Krennic, because Director Krennic basically discounts your entire deck, which is insane, and it's very difficult to kill. So having this card in your opening really increases your chance of winning by a significant margin. So in this kind of deck, having a significant higher chance to find this card in your opening hand for only 3 HP of a cost, in my opinion, might be worth it. So in my opinion, Nabat Village is a good card, and I think it's only going to get better as time goes on, especially as we're going to be moving towards maybe more combo-oriented decks. They're going to love to have those cards to increase their consistency. So in my opinion, this card is great. It's not going to be an auto-include by any means. You really need a specific deck for this to work, but in those specific deck, it's going to be a great addition. Another comment as well is like there's not a lot of competition for yellow bases. Yellow bases are some of the weakest in the game. So yeah, Nabat Village is going to have an easy time sneaking in. Moving on, we got Hera Syndulla, the new unit that can turn into an upgrade. I like this card. It's a 2/3 for 2 restore 1 is not bad. And the option to turn it into a pilot is very strong, and the piloting of course is quite good. +2/+3 for 2 is a good rate, and also gives it restore 1. So as far as like blue-white 2 drops, there's just not that many of them that are great. So whenever you're playing a double blue deck, you sometimes kind of like falling short on certain playables. I think this card is quite situational. I think if you want to play this card, you want to play a card that the deck that really that needs like vehicles. If also playing this card could also be played in a wedge blue deck if you ever fancy playing something like that. So I think it's a good card. I just think that the amount of decks that are going to be wanting to play that card are relatively few and far between, but it's going to be a welcome addition to the decks that basically have a specific need for this type of card. Next, we got No Glory, Only Results, and this card is pretty great. It is basically a strict improvement over Vanquish, and it allows you to control of any non-leader unit and then defeat it right away. That means basically that you get to kill a non-leader unit for 5 resources, which is the same as Vanquish, but you also benefit if that unit gets a when defeated effect, you get to benefit from it. And also it allows you to play around certain abilities, like for example, you can use this to kill if I'm not mistaken, you can use this to kill a TIE Phantoms. You take control of TIE Phantoms and then defeat it, because defeated TIE Phantom is only immune and defeated effect from the opponent. So it is, in my opinion, a very powerful effect that control decks are really gonna love. And there were kind of a debate of whether Vanquish or Rival's Fall was kind of better in control in a black-blue control decks. And I think that with No Glory, Only Results, clearly, especially in the meta that we're going to have, where there's going to be a lot of when defeated effect, clearly No Glory, Only Results is going to be a stronger option. But there's also the argument of saying that if a lot of pilot leaders see play, then Rival's Fall is also going to see play. My anticipation is like pilot leaders are not going to see that much play, in my opinion. I think they're overall too risky and they're not that powerful for the majority of them. So in my opinion, No Glory, Only Results will probably be the heart removal that will be played alongside Rival's Fall. Alongside Fail the Dragon in the control decks. Obviously, it doesn't prevent you from sneaking in like a Rival's Fall in your main deck or on your sideboard. But in my opinion, No Glory, Only Result is really a great improvement, and it's likely to be very good in the next meta. Obviously, for decks that do not play blue-black, they still might be playing Vanquish, but obviously Vanquish, which used to be the primary removal, all catch-all removal in set 1, is getting more and more competition with every set and should see less and less play. And so moving on, we got Stolen AT-Aller. And this card is quite interesting. So 4/5 for 3 in space is an insane rate, but the when defeated effect is quite significant. So I think this card is very good against aggro, because 4/5 for 3 is effectively just a great way to race the opponent, especially if you're playing yellow. Most likely you are playing aggro or tempo yourself, meaning that your gameplay is going to try to race the other aggro deck. And in this context, Stolen AT-Aller is very nice, because you get a very great rate for a card. Obviously, space units are... This might not be true in the new expansion, but overall space units are always kind of a bit more protected. The fact that he has 4 health means that he still dodge Fail the Dragon, but it's mostly great against aggro. I think against control it's very bad, because obviously then the bonus for killing that unit is massive for them. but if you're playing against in a mirror of aggro, it's a really, really great card. So in my opinion, it's most likely going to be a sideboard card for yellow decks as a way to kind of like, as a racing cards available to you. So I'm going to give this a maybe because obviously it's going to depend on the meta, but in my opinion, it is a great sideboard card for, maybe I should give this a thumbs up to be fair. Let's forget about my rating. I think this is a thumbs up. I think this card is quite good. Also, it is Underworld, which is a nice little bonus. It's a vehicle, of course. But yeah, this card is in my opinion, really good in against aggro. So I think it's going to be a great sideboard card. And the reason why it's called sideboard aggro, because aggro have a tendency to usually do not defeat enemy units. They usually try to ignore enemy units. And the fact that this unit has 5 HP makes it even more difficult to kill. Obviously, if you're playing against someone that plays Tarkintown and stuff, that might be a little bit different. But against something that doesn't have much way to kill enemy units, this card is really, really great. So it's going to be dependent on the meta whether this card is going to see play or not. Moving on, we got TIE Dagger Vanguard. TIE Dagger Vanguard is, in my opinion, too specialized of a card. Deals 2 damage to a unit that has already been damaged this turn. Is just a little bit too specialized. The stat line is pretty horrible for a 3-drop. I think I would just much rather play TIE Interceptors that can deal 3 damage to a space unit. And it's also a 3/2. It does cost 4 though, but in my opinion, TIE Dagger is just a little bit too specialized. A little bit too difficult to make work. You would think that this card is like would be kind of a great addition into Django, because Django has a lot of ways to ping and stuff like this. But I just would rather just play a P38 than this card. Which is P38 is just so much better than this. I mean, obviously it is mono black, so it is a little bit easier to play in a wider variety of decks. But I just think this card is too weak, even as a mono black card. Moving on, we got Phoenix Squad A-Wing, and this card is a very simple 3/2 for 2 in space, which we didn't have access to on the heroism side. We didn't have any 3/2 for 2 in space. So something interesting is that I think this card is obviously would have been a great addition. Would be a great addition in potentially Sabine. I think that it's also a rebel, which is super relevant, rebel vehicle fighter. So if you're playing Sabine, in my opinion, you play this card over the Alliance X-Wing. Alliance X-Wings had a very good run. It's a very basic card that hasn't seen play for a lot of time. But I think if you're playing Sabine, you're much better off playing the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing, in my opinion. Because it's a more aggressive turn 1 play that will push more damage to the enemy base. And also trades very well with the enemy A-Wing, Green Squadron A-Wing, which still remains the best A-Wing in my opinion. With that being said, I don't necessarily that Phoenix Squadron A-Wing is going to replace Alliance X-Wing in every deck. If you're running a deck, for example, like a Poe Dameron deck, this Poe Dameron deck, in my opinion, really values the 3 HP over the 2 HP. Because really what the Poe Dameron deck wants is to have this space unit survive so he can actually play a Chewbacca, play a Poe Dameron eject combo, or play so something like this. So if you're playing like a classic Sabine deck, I think this Phoenix Squadron is really better than. But if you're playing something that really tries to put a pilot on the 2-drop, you would rather have a turn 1 play that is a bit more survivable, and in this case 3 HP is definitely better. With that being said, of course, it's going to come down to the meta. Is there a lot of daring raids, a lot of ways to deal 2 damage to a unit, and depending on this, obviously the 3 HP or 2 HP might matter a lot more or less. So I mean, in my opinion, it is a good card that definitely is going to see play. Remains to be seen in which deck. Next, we got a Seer 90 Relief Runner, and I like this card quite a bit. It reminds me a lot of Cargo Juggernaut as a 4/6 for 6 that heals you. In this case, it heals you on defeat and not on when play, which is definitely a downside, but it also has a restore too, and it is also a rebel vehicle capital ship. So there's a lot of things to like about this card, in my opinion. It dodges takedown, it dodges Fail the Dragon, it is a space unit, so it is difficult to get rid of, and it does provide with some valuable restoring, can restore both units and base, which is worth noticing. So I think this card is pretty solid. Whether it's going to see play, of course, it does remain a 6-drop with no immediate impact on the game, so obviously that is definitely a downside, and it is not shielded like the Juggernaut is, but I think this card has potential. I'm gonna give this a maybe for now. Next we got dameron, and this is the new dameron unit, which is actually not a unit, because when you play him as a unit, you actually create an X-Wing token, and then you attach that upgrades into it. So it's actually kind of a weird one. So in this case, you're playing 4, and you're putting an X-Wing, and then you putting it as a pilot on it. So it's a 4 mana, 4/5. Basically, because in normal time it's a 4 mana 4/5 in space, or it's a +2/+3 for 2. 4/5 for 4 in space is pretty average. We're talking, of course, about a 4-drop with no immediate impact on the game. So if you play this as a unit, it's not that great. I mean, obviously you have the option of just playing this as a 3/3 that goes alongside with an X-Wing, so you don't have to attach it as an upgrade. So it's also kind of can be like 2 units at once. So I think this card overall is kind of solid. Like, it's just very, very flexible. If I can play as a pilot, as 2 units, or as a big unit in space, that flexibility, in my opinion, is very, very nice. Another thing that I like is obviously the combination with dameron. With Han, the young Han. So if you basically play this card with the young Han's ability, you will play this for 3, and it will come out as a 3/2. But if you turn this into an upgrade, then suddenly the damage doesn't matter, and suddenly you turn yourself with a 3 resources 4/5 in space, and that's very, very nice. 4/5 for 3 in space is a great ratio, and I think this card is going to be really strong in Han to yellow. Will it be enough to bring Han to yellow back into the mix? Because Han 2 has been Han 2 green back into the mix. I don't know, but it's I don't know if there's still going to be a bunch of Talking Town in the meta, so that's going to come down to this. But I think this card is a great addition to Han 2 green, and just for that reason alone, I'll give you a thumbs up. But there's a way this card could also be playable, and just generally speaking, just because for the flexibility is just very interesting. Next, we got TIE Ambush Squadrons. TIE Ambush Squadron is a kind of a card that is kind of overpriced. The 2/3 stat lines, having ambush is nice, but ambush for such a low stats makes it very difficult to actually kill anything with the ambush. However, it has a very nice when play and when defeated effect that leaves it behind the TIE Fighter, which reminds me of the B1 like escorts, like that's a 3 resources, you put a 1/1, and then it has when played, when defeated, leaves a 1/1 behind. This one costs 1 more, but it does have a 2/3 ambush stat line, which can be worth it depending on the meta. So I don't think this card is unplayable. I think that there's definitely some application for it. Maybe if you're in a meta where there's a lot of cheap, like let's say if you playing against in a meta where there's a lot of 2 health units, you're playing against Django, for example, you get to ambush that guy, you can kill like a 3/2, and then you can leave behind 2 TIE Fighter tokens. I think that's actually quite powerful, even for 4 resources. Of course, you need to be playing a deck that actually wants to play some TIE Fighters. So I'm going to give this a maybe. I don't think it's unplayable. I don't think it's bad, but it's definitely going to come down to a very specific meta and has to be played in a specific deck. It is also Imperial Fighter Vehicle, which obviously are 3 important traits. Next, we got the Sith Troopers. This is basically 3/3 for 3, gets +1 attack for each damage on the defending player control. Horrible stat line, very situational ability. This card is bad. Moving on, we got the Resistance X-Wing. 2/2 for 2 in space, it's horrible. The fact that he gets a bonus whenever it is piloted is nice, but I don't see this making up for the very weak stat line. There's 2 of 2/3 for 2. Like, I think this, I don't think the bonus makes up for the fact that this card really needs a pilot, and the fact that this card is so fragile, it's very easy to kill before you get to put the pilot on it with very low resources. I'm not very high on this card. I think it's the kind of card that is, if you are putting a pilot on a unit, the unit is already going to have tons of stats, so getting an additional +1/+1 on top of this is not really that great, and it feels like the +1/+1 is kind of just making up for the fact that the unit is just very weak to begin with. So, not a big fan. Then we got the Phantom 2. This card is very interesting. The 3/3 for 3 grit, and then as an action, it can actually equipped as an upgrade to give +3/+2 and grit to specifically the ghost. So what to say about this? So first of all, as just a simple unit, it is pretty bad. 3/3 grit is a horrible stat line, and there's no reason really to play this. It has tons of great trade, rebel, vehicle, spectre, but yeah, overall, just 3/3 grit is pretty bad. The action ability is interesting, but it is once again kind of a big pinata. There's currently 2 ghosts in the game. A ghost that we already have that gives shield to people, and there's another ghost that we're just gonna see right now. I just think that this unit is gonna make it so it's gonna just put I think this mechanic is very cute from a thematic standpoint, but it is way too slow for aggro, because the ghost is quite of an expensive unit, and if you're playing against control, you're just putting a massive target on one big unit and gives the opponent the opportunity to just do a great 2-for-1 by just blowing up your ghost, which is not that difficult to do, because the ghost does not have any specific protective capabilities outside of just having a lot of stats. So in my opinion, this card is not good for competitive play. Obviously a very fun card to play with, I'm sure. So there's a new leader. So sorry, I just want to talk about the ghost. We'll talk about the ghost after, unfortunately, because it's not in the right order. Anyway, let's talk about Admiral Trench, which is the other new leader that has been spoiled this week on top of Poe. This leader is quite interesting in multiple ways. First of all, this ability, discard a card, and then that costs 3 or more, and then draw a card afterwards, I think is very good in if you have a deck that really plays with the discard. So right now, unfortunately, we haven't had that many great cards that interacts with the discard. I think the best is obviously Palpatine's Baton. Unnatural Life, unfortunately, has been quite underpowered, and unfortunately, Palpatine's Baton by itself is not enough to really build a discard-focused deck where you're trying to reanimate massive targets. But if ever this deck becomes playable, at the moment, Trench is by far the best option to do this, because you get a free action that allows you to not only dig for your combo piece, but allow you to discard a very large card. The fact that it only can discard a large card, a card that costs 3 or more, is actually not really a big of a problem, because if you're playing some sort of reanimator deck, you want to discard the massive cards to reanimate it with Admiral, with Palpatine's Return, and obviously you want to discard this unit. I'm not a big fan that it is obviously a cunning leader, because obviously in this kind of archetypes, most of the big Sith lore that you want to reanimate are red, so it's a bit unfortunate that this card is in yellow. But once again, if there's support for it in this set, I can totally see this card being played, but we need to have a significant amount of support for it. But the ability theoretically is quite powerful. The leader deployment is very interesting, because it's one of the second leader this set that can be deployed multiple times, like Poe can. Because his deploy action is not an epic action, it's an action that can be reused over and over again, and only what it requires is just spend 3 resources and exhaust Admiral Trench. And you need to have 6 resources or more to be able to deploy the leader. In this case, you get a 4/5 Separatist Official. And the when deploy ability allows you to effectively draw a card, but it's not just a card from the top of the deck, it's a card among 4 that your opponent decides. So it's kind of like you look at the top 4 and you get your opponent discard 2 of them, and then the 2 remaining cards you choose which one you're getting, basically. So you're effectively gonna draw the 3rd worst card of those 4 cards. So that's which is relatively weak of an ability, but it is card advantage and immediate impact on the game, which is nice. So overall, I think the Trench deployment is very bad. First of all, the fact that you have to pay resources to deploy your leader is a very big downside, because one of the great things about leaders is their ability to add to the board without having to spend any resources, which is, in my opinion, really huge. Also, the leader deploys on 6, has horrible stats, and the card advantage, as I said, you're only getting the 3rd best card out of 4 cards. So in my opinion, Trench is very weak as a leader deployment. However, if you're playing against a control deck the ability to deploy your leader over and over and over and over and over again is quite powerful. If you're playing against a controlled Bosk, the last thing I want to play against is a leader that can just come into play over and over and over again, in which case this leader becomes a 3-cost 4/5 that draws you a card, which is very strong. So if you see this not as a leader deployment, but as just as a recursive unit that is just a 3 resources 4/5 that draws you a card, then the card becomes really, really strong. But obviously that's only very strong in a very grindy matchups that are very, very long, where you get to deploy trench over and over and over again. So in my opinion, and obviously you also need some sort of mechanics that will allow you to put back some cards into your deck, like restock, in order to not run out of cards as well, because you are basically milling 3 every time you deploy them. So there's a lot of things that needs to be taken into consideration. So what can I say about Admiral Trench? Obviously, it's going to come down to the amount of support he gets. If he gets a lot of supports, I can see this leader being quite good. If he doesn't get a lot of supports, unfortunately, I think it's quite bad. If I had to compare this to obviously this leader is very comparable to Aphra. In my opinion, he has a much stronger ability than Aphra, because you get to decide which card in your hand you're discarding, while with Aphra, you just mill from the top of the deck. You don't get to decide anything. And it also allows you to dig deeper into the deck and find the combo pieces. So Trench, in my opinion, has a much stronger leader ability than Aphra. I also think that Aphra deployments is a little bit better against aggro, obviously, as it is deploys for free and it deploys on 5. But against control, the Trench is far better of a leader deployment. So overall, I think Trench is a better leader than Aphra in terms of what it is trying to do. But once again, we're still going to need some support for this card to see any play. Next, we got Invincible. This card is kind of supposed to combo off with Trench in the sense that you play him, and because you can deploy Trench over and over again, you can use Invincible's ability multiple times. But the reality is that I think this Invincible is most likely going to see play in is a great addition to a Doku deck, because in Doku it simply just is a 5/5 for 6, and if you play this with Exploit, you can potentially play this card on turn 2, which is extremely scary. So 6/6 for 5 out of the gate. Keep in mind that in order to play this card for 5, you just need to have a unique Separatist card. Obviously, your leader is a Separatist card, so if you play any Separatist leader, this card becomes amazing. Because it becomes like a 6/6 for 5, and then once you deploy your leader, you get the bounce as well. The fact that the bounce, ideally you want to be able to bounce the turn you play the Invincible, because it gives less time for the opponent to remove the Invincible. But I believe that it still remains very, very strong to be able to put a 6/6 for 6 early. It's not that easy to kill a 6/6 in space. And once again, you can, if you play a 6/6 in space on turn 2, you are in a very good position if your opponent does not have an answer. So obviously this can happen with Doku, very simple. You play Confederate Courier on turn 1. On turn 2, you use the ability, the Exploit ability, to reduce the cost of this card by 2. You reduce by 1 thanks to Doku being a Separatist leader, and then you can play this card for 3 resources on turn 2, which is very, very strong. And then later on, Doku gets to deploy, you get to bounce something. So I think this card is amazing in Doku, and I think it's going to see play. I also think this card is going to be very good with Piet, because Piet costs 5, so you can literally play this card and then deploy with Piet right away, which will allow you to bounce a unit that costs 3 or less. You don't get the discount from being a Separatist leader, but you do get the discount because Piet is makes capital ship cost less. And if by any chance you have a Separatist unit into play, you can also play the Invincible earlier, which could happen because Piet could also be playing some droid as well as the Invisible Hand as Separatist cards in the deck as well. So for this, there's a lot of things to like about the Invincible. I think it's a really good card, and I'm gonna give this a thumbs up. Moving on, we got the Swarming Vulture Droid, which is the first card in the game that can be selected more than 3 times in the deck. It is reminiscent to some magic cards. I think it's called Relentless Rats. Like you can play like any number of them into your deck, and they get +1/+1 for each of them on the battlefield. It's quite fun. In this case, you can't play just an unlimited amount of them, up to 15 copies, which I think is a smart design decision because having a deck that is entirely made of one card is very boring. However, here 15 is definitely enough for you to really benefit from the effect without just taking up your entire deck. With all that being said, I don't think this card is unfortunately competitively playable. First of all, as I said, 2 for 2 is a pretty horrible stat line, even for space units. And obviously, one Swarming Vulture Droid is a fine turn 1 play. Playing another Swarming Vulture Droid on turn 2 is not as exciting of a play. And once again, they're quite easy to kill. Star Wars Limited is a game where killing units is very easy because not only can you kill them with removal, you can also kill them by attacking them. So that means that keeping a lot of Vulture Droids into play at any given time is going to be very difficult. There is the obvious combo with Invincible Hand that allows you to put multiple of them into play relatively easily, but even in that context, I'm not super optimistic about this. Even in that context, I wouldn't want to. I don't think the Invincible Hand is really quite enough to make running a bunch of Swarming Vulture Droids worth it, in my opinion. I think you would rather just play Separatist 2-drop that are just good by themselves and don't need a million of them. They also take up a lot of the space in your deck as well. And you do not want to have your space composed by... Like, realistically, those cards are likely to be 3-2 for 2s most of the time, and that's even, like, in the best case scenario. So I don't think, realistically, you can expect to just get out of control and completely overwhelm your opponent with a bunch of Vultures. So it's going to be purely casual card, in my opinion, and not something that's going to be competitive. Moving on, we got the Ghost. So the Ghost is basically finally like a real payoff here for the Spectre. Unfortunately, I don't think it's very good, and I'll explain you why. So basically, the problem with this card is, so the stat line is fine, 5/6 for 5, but there's multiple problems with this card. The first major problem is that it doesn't have an immediate impact on the game. You play it for 5 and then it doesn't do anything. The second problem is like you need to do something else in order to make him good. You need to upgrade it to actually give it Sentinel and then give all of your other Spectre Sentinels. So that's the second issue. The availability that this card share the keywords to all the other units, that's in my opinion is once again relatively irrelevant because I mean, you give me some, like, it requires you to have all the Spectre's units into play for this to work. So you really need to have a very significant board states. There's just too much that needs to happen for this to be good. You need to play this. You need this to survive. You need to have a board made of Spectre units. You need to upgrade that guy, you know, to give sentinels to everybody, and then eventually another keyword. Like, just so much that needs to happen for this to work. Basically, if you're playing against aggro, this is way too slow. 5 drops, just so slow. And if you're playing against control, you're creating this gigantic pinata unit that is so easy to kill that any removal can just get rid of, and then you are losing basically all of your bonuses. And everything you've built up, all the scots you spend, just basically don't matter anymore. And it's a huge blowout. So unfortunately, that for all those reasons, this card is going to remain a purely casual card, and it's not competitive by any stretch. I don't see any way to make this any good. So unfortunately, Hera is going to remain a very casual leader for Star Wars Unlimited and not a competitive leader. That is, in my opinion, just as a pretty certain things. Another thing to know as well is that if your opponent plays like a bounty card, like for example, a top target on this, the Ghost will also give the keywords, it will give the keywords bounty to all the other units, and specifically the bounty deal with that unit if it's unique EL6. So that means that if human plays top target and then kills the Ghost, use a removal to kill the Ghost, he will use like a removal that can kill multiple units. He can trigger multiple times the top target effect. That's extremely niche, and I don't expect this to happen very often, but it's something to know. So obviously, for all those reasons, this card is pretty bad for competitive Premier play. Next, we got Nebula Ignition, which is a new board wipe that costs 9 and defeat each unit that isn't an upgrade. So there's two interesting things about this card that isn't upgraded. Sorry, it's obviously a card that is meant to be used in in a deck where it's a relatively controlly slow deck where you are going to be upgrading your own units. So in my opinion, the best candidate for a deck like this would be something like a control version of Rey. So Rey is naturally a leader, like a Rey blue deck. Is a deck that's relatively very slow, of course. The leaders deploy on 6, tons of restore. Double blue is one of the slowest color combo in the game. But Rey has the ability to give +1/+1 upgrades units to its units, and he also has a lot of units that comes into play shielded. So you can very much create a game where all of your units are upgraded, and suddenly then this card becomes a 9 resources, just get rid of the opponent board. Obviously, it does cost 9, which is fairly expensive, and obviously your opponent will also eventually have upgrades on their units, which means that they might actually be ignoring the Nebula ignition. So that's something, of course, to keep in mind. So I think it's going to require some testing for this to know if this card is going to be good or not. It's also, of course, if you're just building a purely control deck, it gives access to heroism, to a sort of board wipe, which is the number one thing that the heroism control decks have been missing, is a board wipe that is playable for them. Obviously, this one does cost 9, and once again, not being able to defeat units that are upgraded is going to be a downside if you're playing this in a regular control deck. So, in all, it's definitely a card that's going to be very niche, and it's going to require a very specific build for this to work. But it's an additional options, and I think it's not a bad card, so I'm going to give this a maybe. Moving on, the last card of today's video is going to be Cham Syndulla. I like this card. It is a rebel, which is nice. It's playable in any red deck, and the when playability is very relevant to the current meta, as it is effectively a great counter to Han decks, because Han obviously have the ability to give themselves extra resources using Han's ability. Well, if you play Cham Syndulla, you're gonna give yourself a free ramp, which is insanely powerful for a 4-drop that also has a very decent stat line as a 5/4. Not only that, the 5/4 stat line is actually very relevant against Han Yellow, as it allows you can go ahead and kill those pesky 3/5s, and suddenly and still stay alive. And obviously Han Yellow is notorious for playing a huge amount of 3/5 units. So this card is, in my opinion, a potentially great sideboard card against Han's decks in general, and I think that is a great addition to the game, as we're currently experiencing a Han problem where Han is by far the strongest deck in the game. So obviously having a card that will help with this is very beneficial, and for this reason alone, I'll give you a thumbs up. I don't think this card is gonna single-handedly fix the Han problem, but it is an additional options that red decks have access to in order to help in this specific matchup. Thank you so much also wanted to say as well that it's not only good against Han, which makes it a very good sideboard card, it's good against any ramp deck for that matter, and I anticipate that ramp deck are always going to be a thing in Star Wars Unlimited, so having access to that is also great. Thank you so much for following that video. I hope that you find some useful information, and if you like it, if you like the video, please like the video and subscribe. If you got any other observation around the card that we've covered today, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.